Good afternoon and welcome to the CCSQ DNA Town Hall. For those of you who are new, these calls are designed to provide you with updates, announcements, and training demos related to the CDR, SAS via Databricks, and more. So let's cover some administrative announcements before we get started. Please stay muted on the call. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat for us to answer during the Q&A. And then lastly, we're going to be recording today's call and we'll make sure all of the meeting materials will be available on Confluence. Additionally, today, our slide deck has a few links embedded as well, and those will be made available in the Confluence space as well. Let's read over our agenda. So we're going to be sharing some information about the data camp coming up this November. We're going to have our monthly satisfaction survey. We're going to review those results over the last few months and then administer the next poll. We have updates regarding the Abari decommission and then upcoming efforts with Hive to Glue migration and schema migration to Lakehouse. And then finally, we'll wrap up with a Q&A. Next slide, please. So the first thing we're going to be covering is the CCSQ Data and Analytics Fall 2023 Data Camp. That's coming up in November. Registration and session information will be coming soon, so please keep an eye out for that. In the meantime, we did want to give you a little bit of information to preview what's coming and a video.
On November 15th and 16th, the CCSQ Data and Analytics team will be holding our 5th CCSQ Data Camp, a multi-session event focused on educating the CCSQ D&A user community. The mission of the CCSQ D&A team is to encourage the community to come to the data, as it is vital to build and utilize centralized, robust, and reliable data and analytics solutions. During this year's data camp, we will be exploring our theme of leveraging the analytics toolbox, as we discuss the latest updates and enhancements to Databricks, SAS via, and QuickSight that you can leverage for your analytical work. We will also explore other topics related to the centralized data repository's data and CCSQ's future vision for the roadmap. Visit our site today for session and invitation information. We hope you can join us.
As I said, that information will be coming available soon, so keep an eye out for that. And in the meantime, I'm handing it over to Alicia.
Thank you. So good afternoon, everyone. I want to talk a little bit about our monthly survey results from June to August. If you can go to the next slide. So I wanted to give an update on where we stand with satisfaction survey results. We'll start with performance and uptime for the month of August. There were 54% of respondents that were satisfied with the performance and uptime of the environment. This was a decrease from June and July. There were 24% that were dissatisfied with the uptime and performance in the environment, and that was an increase from June and July. 16% of respondents were answered that they were neutral, and that just seems to fluctuate from month to month. And then NA reduced some, but it's largely dependent on our participants in the call for a given month. Next slide. So let's talk a little bit about kind of the top categories that came up in the written responses. So number one was outages and downtime. So many of you had mentioned experiencing issues with outages and downtime impacting work, including instability of SAS via and downtimes resulting from migrations. The number two item was transition from Abari to Databricks. The transition process has been described as cumbersome and problematic, including several issues that were reported. The third one was SAS via, just inconsistent access, regular downtime, general instability. Communications and support kind of came in as our fourth most common theme. It seems like there was a lack of communication about issues and changes that was perceived, as well as readily available training and guides. We had again performance-related issues, both as we've mentioned, as well as the outages and downtimes. A few permission-related issues, concerns, and then just the impact in general to the changes that are coming with the environment. A few respondents praised our CCSQ team for the efforts and particularly the macros that were rolled out and the ease of the transition. However, overall, the Abari decommission has been bumpy. Next slide. So, related to overall satisfaction with the environment for the month of August, it was 46% of respondents were satisfied with the environment. There was a decrease in that from June and July. 36% were dissatisfied, which was an increase again from June and July. 13% of respondents were neutral, which is a slight reduction from the prior months, and then NA stayed the same. Next slide. So related to help desk support for the month of August, it was 71% of respondents were satisfied with the support they received from the help desk. There was an increase from June and July in this category. 7% were dissatisfied. This was a decrease from July. 7% of respondents were neutral, which is a slight reduction from prior months. And then NA stayed about the same as July. Then next slide. So more specific results regarding the satisfaction of the help desk. There was various levels of satisfaction for the support. Some of them were positive about timeliness, responsiveness, and relevance, and some of them kind of the opposite of that. So typically what we see is kind of an even split of timely and satisfactory and quick responses versus some that take longer. Can we go to the next slide? Right. So related to training and resources for the month of August, 53% of respondents were satisfied with training and resources. This was a decrease from June and July. 26% were dissatisfied, and that was an increase for June and July. And 12% of respondents were answered neutrally, which is a slight reduction from prior months. And then NA reduced some, but it's largely dependent on who's attending the call for the month. Next slide. So we'll go into a little bit more details too in terms of the responses seen related to this in the written comments. So multiple respondents indicated that we need more clear step-by-step guides to new tools, need more training materials and resources on specific platforms such as Databricks and SAS Viya. So we are continuing to kind of grow that catalog of trainings. There were several participants who spoke about the need for better or additional data dictionaries or that type of documentation. And then some mention of version control, but there wasn't a lot of details around that as well. So mostly the other thing was related to known issues and workarounds. We're trying to increase the communications around any known issues, workarounds, tips and tricks, things like that as we move forward. Next slide. So now we're going to kick off the monthly satisfaction survey for September. In a moment, a Zoom poll will pop up on the screen. You'll have 5 to 6 minutes to answer. You'll need to scroll down to see all the questions. Once you've completed all the questions, please be sure to hit submit. As a reminder, we use the data to improve our tools, training, and offerings for CDR platforms. So we value your feedback, and the more specific, the better. And a few reminders before we get started: only answer the poll if you are a user of the CDR environment. And again, be as specific as you can in open-ended responses. You can go ahead and kick off the poll.
We're about through our survey time. Just a reminder to make sure you are scrolling all the way to the bottom to make sure you're not missing any questions. Thank you. Most people are about halfway through the questions, so we're going to go ahead and give another minute. 30 more seconds to wrap up. Thank you. Do you mind going to the next slide, please?
All right. So me again. I'm going to talk a little bit now about the MBARI decommission and any transition updates related to that. Next slide, please. So the DNA team was originally targeting the decommission of MBARI for September 29th. Due to issues around performance and some formatting constraints, our team is currently working to resolve, which I'll discuss here in a later slide in greater detail. TMS has decided to put the MBARI decommission on hold until that resolution is complete. Working actively with Databricks to come to resolution on the issues as soon as possible. We please keep an eye out for communications around a new date. We will get those out as soon as we have a new target date. Once the issues have been resolved and all the users have been migrating, then we will decommission MBARI during our regularly scheduled maintenance windows. Next slide. So actions that users need to take. We will need from the community to ensure a smooth decommission. We need users that have previously used Hive connection to SAS to prepare to migrate to SAS to Databricks. First, what you would need to do that is requesting access through HARP to the Databricks workspace. You do that in HARP by selecting Quality Analytics and then selecting your organization and then selecting Databricks Developer. Once you've gotten the role request completed in HARP, you'll then need to connect using the new SAS macro to enable access to the notebook SQL cluster. There is documentation and links later in the slides, and as was previously mentioned, those will be shared as well. Next slide. So while we're talking about notebooks and clusters, it seems appropriate to give some background on the different cluster types used in the CDR environment. So what is the difference between a notebook SQL cluster and the compute cluster and the R-only cluster? The notebook SQL cluster was released in July, and it's being used for connection to Databricks from SAS. It allows users to connect to Databricks through a new macro to allow users to utilize the more scalable compute available in Databricks while still using SAS. There's documentation available, as I mentioned previously. This is a single cluster used by the entire community, but it is scalable to the demands. Next slide. So compute clusters includes the traditional compute cluster as well as the R-only cluster. These clusters were released in early April and allow users to conduct analysis using Databricks notebooks. The clusters are org specific, so they have dedicated resources for each organization. A traditional compute cluster is used for coding in languages like Python, PySpark, SQL, and Scala, while the R cluster is used for coding in R. All native notebook capabilities and library installations are available within Databricks. The traditional compute cluster is able to connect to all of the workbenches and CDR data. However, it's important to note that the R cluster is currently able to connect to only workbench data, not the CDR data directly. This is a known issue, and the data analytics team is working to resolve it. Other notebook capabilities available to the community are the ability to share notebooks with others and the ability to visualize results. Next slide. So as mentioned earlier, there's a few known issues our team is actively trying to remediate with SAS to Databricks connection. First is performance related. When writing a large data set from SAS data set to Hive, we recommend that you use explicit. There's a %select _to _data set that you can use and filter the data and columns down to as little as possible when trying to write. It is available in the documentation available online. Also, it's likely it won't be much faster, if at all faster, when compared to Embari. The second issue is around SAS datasets with date and time formatting issues for columns to Hive. So some of the date formats are not appropriately writing to Hive when writing datasets from SAS. Those are the two current known issues, and there is documentation related to those available on the public Confluence site. Next slide. So here are the links to different documentation and training mentioned. We'll post these in the Zoom chat as well as posting them with the Townhall recordings for future reference, as was previously mentioned. And next slide. Please don't hesitate to reach out to our team for transition related help via one of the methods in this slide. So through the service center, either through Slack or email, and we'd be happy to work with anyone related to any issues that they're encountering. And I will pass it over to Mohammed.
You've probably heard me before. I am Mohammed Bizri. I'm a product owner on the data and analytics team. And I want to talk to you guys about some upcoming improvement and modernization efforts that we are planning for the coming quarters. Next slide, please. So the first one I want to talk about is the migration of table and database metadata from Hive. Next slide. So once the Embari decommissioning takes place, we're going to be following it up with a migration of metadata from Hive to Glue. And that's a part of our efforts to modernize our object store and metadata metastore infrastructure in the CDR to make it more maintainable, scalable, secure, and performant. Next slide, please. So we've done some testing, and we're going to continue to test to make sure that with the change in metastore, there's not going to be an impact to how you read tables and databases in the environment today. So thus far with testing, we haven't seen any changes with column order or column data types or any truncation or anything like that. We will continue to test, though, and make sure that you guys are all aware if there are any changes that need to take place or if there are any issues that arise. So more information will be coming as we arrive closer to implementation. And I just want to note again, please, that this will not take place until after the Embari decommissioning, of which the new date has not yet been. Next slide, please. So there's a completely separate effort, and I want to make this distinction because what we were talking about just now was the metadata. Now I'm going to be talking about what we're doing with the object data. So we're going to be consolidating the physical tables and databases to the CDR Lakehouse. Next slide, please. So some of you may recall our efforts last quarter to migrate all Workbench data from the legacy environment to the new consolidated CDR Lakehouse environment. And so we're pleased to announce we're going to be continuing these modernization efforts in the upcoming quarter. We're going to be migrating the table and database object data from its current place in the legacy environment to the new consolidated Lakehouse environment. Next slide, please. So similar to last quarter, these efforts will be phased out and they will take place during maintenance windows over the next 2 quarters. A reminder that the production maintenance windows are typically during the first Friday of each month. So just so you can keep track of that. And a Confluence page will be released soon to indicate which databases will be migrated during which maintenance window. Next slide. So we ask if you have any concerns related to contractual deliverables over the next 2 quarters, please reach out to our team through the request form process, indicating when you would prefer to have your database migrated, and we will do our best to accommodate. We can do it outside of a maintenance window if that works for your team as well. You can do it at any time, so long as you guys approve of that. And so the request form is linked there, and we'll include it in all the links after this. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, so we've had a few questions coming in the Zoom chat, and I saw that Derek was able to go ahead and answer some of them. So Derek, if I overlap anything that you've already been answering, just keep me posted. But in the meantime, I feel like it'll also be good for other people who may have the same question. So the first one being, while uploading additional documents to any ServiceNow tickets, we encountered restrictions on different file formats. We had to zip together the files into a folder and then upload them. So they're looking for advice on the guidelines and file restrictions in place to upload documents to a ServiceNow ticket.
Yeah, I can help with that. I mean, so the administration of the ServiceNow interface is somewhat out of our control. However, what we can do is reach out to the ServiceNow team, make sure that we have all of the requirements and guidance for management of files in ServiceNow tickets, and we can make that available to all end users. So we'll work on that after that.
How do you access your Workbench in Databricks?
Yeah, so I was actually replying to this. You can use your organization specific compute cluster or R only cluster, and there is a SAS macro you can utilize within SAS Via that will direct you to what the actual location is of a specific file in your Workbench and how it maps back to S3. And then using either the R only compute cluster or your regular compute cluster, you can use some sort of a PySpark or RSpark to import and export specific types of files and things from your Workbench.
What are all of the data sets we saved in Hive the same place even after the migration?
Good question. So when we're talking about the metadata migration, the physical location of your Hive tables and databases will remain the same. And regardless, as you query them, all your tables will still be in the same databases. We're not gonna move tables from database to database. And same thing, honestly, with the physical object migration to the Lakehouse. You'll still query it exactly the same. All the tables will still be in their associated databases. It's just their physical location in S3 will change.
Thanks. What is the impact of the Hive to Glue migration to users, and will we need to modify our code, or will the migration seem seamless from our end?
Good question. Everyone loves the term seamless migration, right? But the idea is that we are going to do a one-time cutover event, fully syncing all Hive metadata to Glue over a maintenance window. And so the idea is that you will go to sleep Friday and wake up Monday and everything will be in Glue. Now, if there are any changes to your code, or I don't think there'll be any changes to your code specifically, but what we are keeping an eye out for and testing is making sure that there's no differences in how SAS or Databricks interpret the tables, like data types or column order or anything like that, which would really be the impact of changing the meta store from Hive to Glue. Thus far, we haven't seen anything. I'm going to continue to test and make sure that you guys are aware if there are any changes at all.
Thank you. Will CAS-libs be available in Databricks?
Derek?
No, CAS-libs are specific to SAS Via and the CAS engine. However, the CAS-libs that are currently set up as direct connections to, for example, iKeys data, that in the future can and likely will be modified so that it'll be potentially using Databricks Unity Catalog in order to have the ability to connect to an outside DBMS within Databricks, and that no longer then would require us setting up direct connections within a CAS lib to the iKeys data. Instead, it would just be an available connection through the Databricks SQL cluster.
When will we be able to upload and download files within Databricks? This functionality has been disabled.
So uploading and downloading files within Databricks, that's all going to be done through your Workbench. You can utilize File Cloud or MFT currently to upload larger files onto your Workbench, which is just an S3 bucket that's mounted. And then from there, you can access those files either via SAS Via or Databricks on your Workbench or S3 bucket. So having access to upload files directly into Databricks isn't, I don't believe, going to be a functionality that we would allow, because everything needs to stay in the cloud. And so you should be uploading files to your Workbench via MFT. There's a SAS Studio user interface you can utilize as well. And also, like I said, File Cloud is another possibility.
Thanks. How does Lustre fit into Lakehouse and Glue?
Great question. So Lustre is essentially a file system that allows more performant reading of unstructured files from S3 to the applications you use, like Databricks and SAS. And so when we migrated the workbenches, which we consider unstructured data, and that's because it can store literally anything. It can be PNG files, PDF files, Excel, CSV, whatever. They would be mounted onto Lustre as a file system. And that's kind of how it works, like with the Lakehouse when we migrated Workbench data there. With databases and tables, that's more structured data. And so they don't really need like a file system like Lustre. But the idea with migrating them to the Lakehouse is that we are marching towards a more centralized user storage environment, both to make it more performant, manageable, and scalable, but also more secure to ensure that we, have better security and over the data that we have in the environment.
We use JDBC connection to Hive to run DDL statements to manage our tables published in the CDR. How will this change? I'm assuming this will be a code change.
Yes, so you're not actually connecting to Hive. You're connecting to a server that has a Hive endpoint that it's attached to in order to access the Hive metadata. So we would just work with you guys, other organizations, on what the different server would be, where that endpoint would no longer be Hive, but it would be Glue that it's pointing to. You would connect to the same server. It's just the endpoint of that metadata catalog would be Glue instead of Hive.
Thanks, Terk. Which Confluence page has additional information about the Embari decommission? I'm having trouble finding it from the main CCSADA page. I think it was CCSQ.
Get that pasted into the chat.
Yeah, and all links will be made available alongside the slides after the town hall.
Brandon had like a follow-up to your explanation that you just gave. So he said that they use a Hive JDBC driver for that, and if there's a Glue equivalent.
Yeah, off of the top of my head, I'm not entirely sure if there's like an equivalent Glue specific driver, but my guess at this point would be like it probably could utilize some kind of a JDBC driver, and certainly we would be able to work with your team in order to make sure that you've got the correct driver installed and it's configured correctly with appropriate access to the specific server.
Yeah, and if you still have further questions, Brandon, please use the collaboration channel we have. We can work with you if there's any issues or questions.
Thanks. Our next question is, are you recommending that SAS users stop using SAS, or am I misunderstanding?
Nope. Okay, so
Yeah.
correct me if I'm wrong, Derek. So my understanding is that we have a macro that allows you to make the same explicit connections to Databricks that you formerly did with Hive. And so there's an option in that macro to either run your explicit code on Embari or on Databricks Compute. And what we're asking end users to do is to begin testing, migrating their code to Databricks Compute using that option in the macro versus Embari. So you'd still be running your code in the SAS application, just on a different compute engine.
Right, and using your libname connections, which would be more of an implicit connection, that's where we have recognized we've got a lot of we've got performance issues. We've got a couple of things that we're testing for possible solutions in parallel currently to try and get around these performance issues so that you can still have that direct implicit connection to a Hive table and execute a SAS specific code and specifically SAS syntax. All we're saying is that we would recommend that you push as much as you can of your code as using an explicit connection and using the Databricks cluster, as that's where you're going to see significant improvements in performance, specifically around extracting claims data. You could extract Part B line level claims an entire year's worth, and it could take you 5 hours to execute that on Embari. Using the Databricks cluster with SAS, it would take you 8 minutes. So like that's what we're talking about, while we are acknowledging trying to bring this stuff in using SAS syntax on an implicit connection and writing large amounts of SAS data to a Hive table with that implicit connection. The performance is not there. So we are currently working on solutioning. How do we get that performance better and much closer to what we're used to seeing with Embari? And that's what we're currently working on.
Yep. And just to add on a little bit to that, explicit is always the recommended approach. I mean, even on the current infrastructure with Embari, implicit is much slower. So explicit would be the direction. Explicit where possible is the recommended approach.
Next question, what are the system resources available for the R cluster and then parentheses?
Yeah, so we do have like default settings on the clusters. So you can always work with us, providing, good business justifications. If you are needing more system resources, rather if it's more worker nodes or larger types. Currently, I believe the R cluster default settings are set up like the driver has 32 gigs of memory across 8 cores versus, and then it has, obviously it has workers that has a maximum number of worker nodes of 30 right now. Each of those worker nodes, I believe, has about 16 gigabytes of memory across 4. So if you were to use it and spin it all those available resources up, you would have 480 total gigabytes of memory on the worker nodes across the 120 cores. So again, if there's something happening performance-wise or memory error wise, certainly reach out to the help desk, and it's something that we can work with your specific organization on, potentially increasing some of that those resources if required.
Thank you. Alicia did drop a link in the chat there as well. So circling back to, because we don't have any other additional questions and we do have a few more minutes. So circling back to a couple of the questions that Derek had started responding to in the chat, but might be good for the group. Regarding the Embari decommission, are all SAS users affected when accessing all data, including organization-specific workbenches, or is this only when accessing the CDR?
Accessing Hive schemas and tables within the CDR.
The data on your workbench, that is the same. We did move that data to a different environment within AWS S3, and we are mounting it through a different type of a file system called Lustre, FSX, which should help improve some performance there. But that data is completely separate, has nothing to do with Databricks or Embari. That's all using SAS servers and the connections on SAS from that perspective.
Okay, our next question. It seems like this might have been mentioned before, but will the CSAT tables in Databricks be partitioned through as in Embari?
I believe they already are partitioned. My understanding is that they are partitioned by through date. Yeah, Grant. Yeah, thank you, Grant. So yeah, that hasn't changed.
Okay. Have the issues with Hive data sets not dropping correctly, Hive drop table macro, been resolved?
Yeah, that's a great question. So this is it's not consistent. It's very sporadic with how it does that. We do have a support ticket opened up with Databricks currently that they are looking into this specific issue. We certainly recommend that if you are going to be dropping a Hive table, you use the Hive drop table macro and not create some sort of like an implicit connection with a libname statement and trying to delete the table from the SAS interface. Certainly using that Hive drop table macro is what we recommend, but we do realize and understand for some reason there are occasions where the Hive metadata is getting dropped, but that physical underlying file object in S3 is not being removed. So we are actively working with the Databricks support team on that to try and figure out exactly what could be causing it and why it sporadically is happening so that we can resolve that.
Can we create partition of our Hive table? Is there any limit or number of partitions, such as partition by Medicare ID, parentheses, millions of ID?
Yeah, so you have the ability to partition any Hive table that you create. Of course, you're going to want to follow best practices. When it comes to partitioning, it really won't help if you're creating like a partition on a field that's got lots and lots and lots of values, much like an index. It could just cause performance to actually be completely opposite and reversed. And another thing to note when you are partitioning a table, and if it is a date field in that table, the way that Databricks treats date partitions is that they read them as actual string values. So much like the claims data, where that claim through date is a partition, you need to use that toDate function when you are in Databricks in order for it to understand that you can pass a date value when you're limiting on it. And so that's just something to make a note of. But yes, you can create your own partitions within the tables. If they're really large tables, we definitely recommend creating them specifically on common fields that you would be using within your where statement, and something that doesn't have unique values or lots of different specific values that would be splitting that data up into lots and lots of files.
Thanks, Derek. Is there a resource in Confluence showing an example of using a file in your Workbench in Databricks?
I don't know if we have specific examples out on Confluence yet. We are towards the end of the process of creating some sort of R and Python 101 example notebooks that we can share out to the user community to show different functionalities, such as importing something from your Workbench or exporting something onto your Workbench, and other useful cases of how Python and R can be utilized within specific common packages for data analytics. So that is something that we are working on and will be producing. As far as a specific example of importing, exporting files from your Workbench, we certainly can put something out on the Confluence. If you have a specific request, certainly reach out to the help desk and we can provide examples there as well.
Our next question is, I heard you mentioning accessing Workbench through FileCloud earlier. Can we access our organization specific Workbench on regular FileCloud, or is there different FileCloud access for that?
Yes.
Yeah.
So what you can do, I can take that one, Derek. So basically, what we enable end users with when it comes to FileCloud is we can integrate FileCloud with your SAS via Workbench. And what we can do there is you will access this specific network shares folder in FileCloud, and from there, be able to navigate your Workbench folder like any File Explorer UI. Now, the caveat with that is that one, you'll need FileCloud access. You'll need to request the FileCloud role in HARP. And two, you'll need to submit a request to our team to have the FileCloud integration put into place. And we'll work with the FileCloud team to get that put together for you guys.
So our last question, and it looks like, we just had another one come in. Does SQL Windowing, trying to identify duplicates or unique ID, work the same in Databricks with the old efficiency tips provided by CCSQ remain valid?
Yeah, it Yeah, SQL windowing works just fine. It does on Databricks. It does require that you have an order by statement within your functioning syntax, which I believe Ambari doesn't actually require that. I think it has some sort of an implicit order that it will do on its own. With Databricks, you absolutely can do SQL windowing the exact same way that you would do utilizing Ambari, except that it does require you to have a specific order by field included in it.
Julia, with the time getting low here, I did want to just make one point for everyone on the call though the Ambari decommission date has been pushed out, please take advantage of this time to dig into the documentation we put together on Confluence and to really try to test out your code and different functionalities in connecting SAS to Databricks. This is a great time to do so now that there's been a pause in the decommissioning. So please take advantage of this time to do some testing and dig into it if you haven't done so already.
Thanks, Mohammed. And at this point, I think all of our questions have been answered. So Kat, do you mind going to our next slide? Thank you. So we want to thank everyone for joining us today. Thank you to our presenters for providing us with information, answering our questions. All of our materials from today's meeting will be available on our Confluence space with the recording, and then we'll copy over the slide content and make sure we're including those links for everyone. And then our Q&A from today will be made available as well with all answers provided. And then our upcoming events, we have some maintenance events coming up, and then our next town hall will be October 25th. And then the data camp will be November 15th and 16th, as we mentioned earlier. And as I said, please keep an eye out for upcoming information. And as always, if you have any questions or issues, please reach out to us via email or Slack. Thank you so much for joining, everyone, and we hope you have a great day.